Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to day one of the 2023 Bermuda Underwater Exploration Institute's Youth Climate Summit. My name is Noelle Young, and I am a sustainability solutionist and Bermuda's first female Younga youth delegate. I'm also a Bermuda Ocean Prosperity Program associate and self-proclaimed fish nerd. My educational background is aquaculture and fisheries, and I'll be one of your two hosts for the duration of this exciting event. Now I'll pass the mic over to our other fabulous host so that he can introduce himself.
Good afternoon, all, and thank you for joining us for day one of the third annual BUEI Youth Climate Summit. My name is William Campbell, and I'm a climate resilience designer and broker and a community activist with Bermuda's Love. My educational background is in war and conflict and the connection between climate change and conflict. And I've been blessed to chair the climate justice track for the past 3 years running, and I'm excited as well to be joining you and Noelle again in hosting this year's summit. So to give an overview of the Youth Climate Summit for this year, the purpose of it is to engage and empower young people about global climate issues and to empower them as well to become agents of change in both their local and global communities. You'll have 3 days filled with info-filled virtual sessions, which will feature international youth activists, subject matter experts, and YCS alumni as well. Alumni are students who have previously participated in the Youth Climate Summit, and once the virtual sessions are over, you'll all come together in person at BUEI to engage and collaborate and develop action plans. As a note to our YCS alumni who are joining us, you should have received an email with a link to special sessions, which are both virtual and on-site at BUEI. We would like you to please confirm your attendance when possible. Additionally, for all students partaking, at the end of next week after the summit sessions, you'll all have the opportunity to participate in an environmental project at Cooper's Island Nature Reserve. And you'll hear more about this chance to make a difference throughout the summit, and details will be emailed to all of you participants before the end of next week. I'm going to pass the mic back and over to Noelle to cover the agenda for the day.
So our agenda today will include presentations by two one-of-a-kind international youth activists, Ela Gökçigdem and Demetri Sedita. Our subject matter expert for the day will be Dr. Marshall Shepard, who will give you the buzz on climate change. And then we have two Youth Climate Summit alumni, Olly and Tejah, who will share their experiences with us. I quickly wanted to mention that although everyone in the audience will be muted, we can still all utilize the chat. So please feel free to put all your questions and comments in the chat. We want to know what you have to say. So please take this opportunity to share your thoughts and send as many messages as you like. There will also be Mentimeter polls and word clouds throughout the program. You can submit your answers and ideas through these platforms. Some are multiple choice, but others are open-ended, so use these opportunities to express yourselves. Before we get started, I, of course, just want to give a quick shout out to our wonderful sponsors, HSBC and AXA XL, for going above and beyond in making this event possible. Now, I hope you're ready. Let's begin with a simple task. Can everyone please rename themselves? So click on your image. Select Rename from the menu in the upper right corner near your image. It may look like 3 little dots depending on the type of computer you're using. And please change your Zoom names to your first initial, last name, and school. Again, click on your image, select Rename from the menu options, and change your names to your first initial, last name, and school. I'll give you a minute to do that. Okay, looking good. We've got some changes going on. And we've got lots of people entering the waiting room. That's great. Love to see that. All right, let's get started. Our first activity for today is a multiple choice Mentimeter poll. Check the chat for a link to menti.com. Click the link to open a new browser window, and if needed, type in the code provided in the chat. We'll be using the same link for all the polls, so there's no need to close the windows when you're done. I suggest leaving it open for easy access to the next set of questions. So as you'll see, our first questions of the day are, how concerned are you about climate issues? Number 2 will be, how confident are you in discussing climate change with your peers? And number 3, what is your level of confidence when discussing climate change with an adult? Take a few minutes, think about those questions, and provide your answers. Great. All right, we have 24 submissions for concerned, 11 for very concerned. So it seems like we definitely, as an island nation, have some concerns about climate issues. All right, let's wait a few minutes for some more responses. And we've got some likes, which is great. Feel free to use the reaction buttons in Zoom. All right, 31 responses. We have 33 concerned people and 15 very concerned. Thank you guys for those submissions. Keep them coming in. Again, if you need the link for the Menti poll, it will be in the chat. All right, we have 28 submissions of people that are somewhat confident discussing climate change with their peers. So it seems like everybody is somewhat confident or confident discussing with their peers, which is great to see. Okay, and actually that's really cool because the results are similar for those of you that are comfortable discussing climate change with adults. That's wonderful to see. So that means that we're comfortable voicing our opinions, which is awesome. Hopefully we can move all of those to very confident by the end of this event. All right, you did a fantastic job, guys. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our first pair of youth climate activists who will be presenting today, Ela Gökçigdem and Demetri Sedita. Their commitment to environmental leadership is stellar, and I suggest checking out their bios. The links are in the chat. I'll give them a 1-minute warning when their time to speak is almost up. Then we will have time for question and answer session with both of them. So please feel free to post any questions that you have for them in the chat or any comments. Welcome, Ela. May you please introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone. Again, my name is Ela Gökçigdem. I'm so honored to be here today and learn from all of you further throughout the duration of this conference. And again, as it mentions in my bio, I am currently studying economics and sustainability in Boston, Massachusetts, more specifically at Babson College. But I'm originally from a very small island in Turkey called Afşa, so I have a lot of connections to what you all might be experiencing as a small island nation as well. And I'm very excited to talk to you all more about my activism journey. So I'll share my screen. Apologies for the top bar, we weren't able to get rid of it. But so again, my name is Ela Gökçigdem, and I'll be talking all of you through my journey as an entrepreneurial activist. So again, as I mentioned, I'm from a very small island in the Marmara Sea called Afşa. It's from the southwestern portion. And ever since I was born, I had this passion for the ocean. And ever since I learned how to swim, I snorkeled every day on this small island because there was essentially nothing else to do. But as I grew up, I created a mental log of all the species I observed in the Afşa Island, surrounding the island. And this just came naturally to me. It was out of curiosity. And the island had such a vibrant ecosystem, and I always loved immersing myself in it. I'm sure a lot of you can resonate with that, being from Bermuda. However, as I grew up, I realized there was a huge decrease in species diversity on the island. And again, I had a natural species log in my mind. However, as I grew up, I realized there was such a loss in biodiversity that economy on the island was collapsing. And again, at that time, when I realized the true impacts of climate change and this issue, I was only 19. And I knew I had to do something because whenever I looked around, nobody was doing anything. And additionally, I had just graduated from high school. I was in my first year of college. The first thing that came up in my mind was, who would take me seriously? But I believe that that is a very false idea to have, especially as a young person in this field, because people are starting to listen to youth. Again, conferences such as the Youth Climate Summit shows how important our voices are in this entire movement because we are on the forefront. We see what's happening. And we have this true raw data that we can present to the governments, and people will take us seriously as long as we all come together and we're connected to the right individuals. So essentially, I took this information I received from just snorkeling every day, and I started a business, and I'll talk more about it in further slides. But what I really want to focus on today during this presentation is how can you think like an entrepreneur without running a business? And I really want to emphasize before I get into it is you don't have to be an entrepreneur by starting a business or making a lot of money. That's simply not the case. And essentially, business, the way we run it as of right now, is not sustainable, unfortunately. And what I've learned throughout the past 4 years of my life studying business and economics is that we need to create a new value system. And I firmly believe that if you see a problem and solve it, you're an entrepreneur. Because although you might not be getting direct money from whatever problem you're solving, you never know the impact it is having. It could be in ecosystem services. It could be in saving a species. You're an entrepreneur. And if you're able to think like an entrepreneur, there's almost no problem that you can't solve without the right connections. So going into my personal activism journey, the 3 steps that were crucial to my experience was to observe, as I mentioned, the ecosystem degradation in the island. I also connected. I was right where you all were when I was realizing the true dire impacts of climate change on the island. I was sitting at a youth climate summit hosted by Earth Echo International. And at the time when I was attending that conference, I learned how to storytell. I learned how to put all my experiences into words because there's a lot of emotions too. And you really need to learn how to get other people to resonate with your experience. And I'm assuming most of you are from Bermuda, and I'm sure you have a lot of collective experiences. So throughout the duration of this conference, I really advise you all to talk to each other. You might have connections about similar experiences. Throughout the duration of this panel as well, I would love for you to think of a place that you love and hold so close to your heart, because you never know. If you see a problem in that specific area you hold so close to your heart, and someone else—
Ella, sorry,
Yeah.
this is your 1-minute reminder.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm almost done. You never know if someone else has that similar impact. So at the end of the day, I started a company called Bloom, which converted this endemic algae bloom that impacted the Marmaris Sea. And I didn't have a tech background. I was studying economics, but my connections that I gained from Sustainable Ocean Alliance and Earth Echo International got me to where I am today. And really, connections are so vital. And here at this summit, you're surrounded by so many individuals who simply just want to see you succeed. So take advantage of it. Look who's next to you on the screen. Reach out to them through a private message. You never know what connections can come out of this as well. And my main tips for success, again, as becoming an environmental advocate or activist or even entrepreneur, is really start from a passion. Again, environmental activism comes from a lot of emotion. Learn how to channel that into a project you're very passionate about. And I couldn't emphasize this enough. Network with the people around you. We're all here to help you succeed. Learn how to tell your story, get people to join your mission, and create a new value system. Being a business owner doesn't mean you have to make millions of dollars. As long as you know that you're helping an ecosystem or a community, you're already more successful than most entrepreneurs out there. So I'll put my email in the chat if you'd like to learn more about the entrepreneurial activism journey. And I'm so excited to learn more about Demetri's vision as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Ella, for that insightful presentation. Ella will join us again after Demetri presents to answer any questions that you may have. So please remember to put your questions for her in the chat. We want to see some chat messages. It's pretty quiet in there right now. Please join me in welcoming our next speaker, Demetri Sedita. His passion for positive environmental change is admirable. Please check out his bio. The link is in the chat. Hey, Demetri, you're up next.
Hey, Noelle, thank you. Let me just share my screen here. Okay, so hello everyone. My name is Demetri Sedita. I'm 19 years old and I'm from Tampa, Florida. And for the past several years, I've been working to make the Gasparilla flotilla more sustainable. And today I'm going to tell you the story of how I got involved with this issue. Gasparilla is Tampa's annual mock pirate invasion, where hundreds of thousands of people flock to town every year in order to witness this parade that takes place both on the water, where thousands of private boats follow a main pirate ship into town where it docks, and then a land parade occurs. And this has been going on in some form all the way back since 1904. So it is a long-running tradition in town. And part of the parade, at least over the past few decades, has been the throwing of these plastic Mardi Gras type beads that you can see on the screen here. And they are thrown as part of the floats on the land parade, but also from these private boats that participate in the flotilla, both to people on the shore and from boat to boat. Now, as you can imagine, a lot of these beads end up missing their intended targets, and they sink. They hit the surface of the water and they sink to the bottom of said channel where the parade takes place. And if it weren't bad enough that you have these plastic beads entering the ecosystem, most of them are made with little to no regulations in China, where and they have a lot of toxins in them for that reason. The bulk of the material is often melted down electronic waste, so there's like lead and other toxins in them that way that is now entering the ecosystem. And now, growing up in South Tampa, I witnessed the parade every year. It's practically impossible to ignore. But I looked around and I saw these beads that were hitting the surface of the water, sinking and never to be seen again. And I wondered, is anyone else thinking about this? And is anyone else doing anything about this? And I did a little research, and as far as I could tell, no one was. And so that made me realize that I would need to take the first steps myself. And that led to starting with something that my brother and my dad would do, where we would rig up a sort of weighted fishing hook, cast it out into the channel, let it sink to the bottom, reel it in, and you can just pull in these beads without even sort of seeing them, without targeting them. And that helped us realize the extent of the problem. But again, no one was doing anything about it. So I realized that I would have to try to raise awareness myself. And that's when I started the Green Gasparilla Initiative, where we started with just creating a website and social media and trying to talk to the public about the importance of, celebrating Gasparilla in a more sustainable way. And then we were able to get on make some local news appearances prior to the parade and kind of tell people, remind them to sort of keep their beads on board the boat, right? And celebrate without polluting the environment. And while I think it is most important that we are able to sort of, stop, turn off the tap per se, and stop adding more beads to the problem that are, of the ones that are already down there, it's also important to remove what is already there. And in order to do that, I organized these diver cleanup events by bringing together community partners, various local environmental organizations, dive shops, even the Florida Aquarium, who works with a bunch of volunteer divers. They're based in Tampa. And we've been able to remove thousands of strands of beads and hundreds of pounds of other debris through these diver cleanup events. As you can see here, it's rather crazy how much is down there. But in addition to removing what's in the channel, this also helps to generate more attention to the issue. The local news has sort of picked up on these events, and it helps get the word out to the public more so about the extent of the problem. But what I learned was that this is a really out of sight, out of mind problem, and that if people don't see the issue, then they're not going to really do anything about it. And so I was able to change that by acquiring a small ROV, like an underwater drone, to film the bottom of the channel, as you can see here. And this is the night of the parade in 2019. And I was able to go out and just see that there are beads absolutely everywhere. And you can also see, on the corners of the screen here, some of the species that are in the local ecosystem. And they, are obviously very much impacted by the fact that all of these beads are now in their home. And this footage has been really helpful to me in communicating this issue to people and making it so clear, this thing that everyone was previously able to ignore, basically. So in 2019, I got a chance to meet with the mayor of Tampa, to sort of convince her of the importance of taking action against this issue. And I was able to show her that footage that I just showed you all. And a few months later, we were able to launch the hashtag #BeadFreeBay campaign to encourage the public to not pollute the environment as part of Gasparilla, because one, it's obviously harmful to the local ecosystem, but of course, it's littering. It's also illegal. So we reminded people of these things. And through working with the city of Tampa, we were able to reach a much larger audience than we otherwise would have been. And that was really helpful to get the word out more so than I could alone. So now I want you to think about something that has been that you see in your community in Bermuda that is harming the environment, but that most people seem to be ignoring, just like I did. And so I'll give you about 30 seconds to think about that before we wrap up. All right, so hopefully you now have an issue in mind, and now I'm going to tell you how you can work to change that. And it starts by identifying a problem, like you all hopefully just did. That's what I did. I just look around in my community and I was able to find something that most people seemed to be ignoring, even though it was such a widespread issue.
Demetri,
And
this is your 1-minute reminder.
Perfect, thank you. And, you know, identifying this issue and then taking steps to try to change it. And that starts by raising awareness. And you can do that in many different ways, but I've found that utilizing technology is super helpful. You know, creating a website, social media pages is a great way to get the word out about a problem that we otherwise, you know, didn't have in the past. And additionally, visual evidence, like the video footage that I showed you, can be extremely impactful and really bring to light an issue that otherwise people just don't seem to be paying attention to. So I think getting photos of an issue, getting video and sharing that can be super helpful to communicating that. And finally, persistence. You know, like I said, I've been facing down this parade that has been going on for over 100 years. And my point is not to end the festivities or to tell people to stop partying. No, I think that's great. But to do so in a way that is sustainable, so that we can continue to do so long into the future. And so it's important to communicate that message to people that, yes, we may need to change how we behave a little bit, but that's for the greater good, so that we can continue to do things for a long time to come. So thank you. And I look forward to answering any questions in the Q&A.
Thank you, Demetri, for sharing your work with us. What you have accomplished is inspiring. Thank you so much for sharing that. Ella, I'm not sure if Ella is back. She's actually lost Wi-Fi, but it is time for your question and answer session. So guys, can you please keep those questions coming in the chat? So our first question, what do you do with the beads after you remove them from the ocean?
That is a great question. And that is something that, you know, we've kind of struggled to come up with a good solution for, because like I said, they are toxic. So recycling is a little bit difficult as well, because, you know, there's strands of beads, they get tangled, you know, in your typical sort of recycling equipment. But, you know, there's been a few solutions proposed. And I think in the long term, something I'd like to see is that, you know, we move away from the beads as much as we can, or at least in their current form, and moving to something sort of more environmentally friendly, biodegradable beads. Perhaps there's been some advancements on that. The problem is they're currently rather expensive, but hopefully we get there someday. But in the meantime, the city has organized a sort of bead recycling program where instead of people just throwing them out, they get donated and sorted and then resold to crews for parades the next year. So that's the sort of main solution right now.
All right, our next question from N. Simmons. Do you feel the people of Tampa have responded well to the Bead Free Bay campaign?
They have in general. I think that it's like I said, it's really hard to avoid the parade. If you live in South Tampa, it's just kind of what happens that one weekend at the end of January every year. You can't ignore it. And there are a lot of people who saw what I saw and really wanted to, had always been kind of thinking this, but no one was sort of talking about it. And so we were able to bring people together who had been recognizing this issue, but really hadn't been doing anything about it. And so generally the response has been positive. I mean, there's definitely some people who push back, but once they see the footage, and we can actually explain to them what we're trying to do, which is, again, not to stop the party, but rather to do it in a more responsible way, people are really receptive to it. It just takes a little bit of time to explain why, but yes, in the end, they have been receptive.
You know what? That's really great to hear, because I know it's hard to get support for youth initiatives. It really is.
It certainly
Let's
can
see,
be.
our
Yeah.
next question. All right, from M. Bigley of Summersfield. How old were you when you decided you wanted to help?
So I think the first time we went out doing bead fishing, like I call it, I was like 10 or 11 when I first really started to notice the issue. And it took a couple years of doing that before we really started to do the advocacy part of things. But yeah, I mean, I was pretty young. Like I as I've gotten older, I've been able to sort of get a little bit more involved in the planning stages of things, and working on the communication side, and things like that. But no, I started out fairly young, in noticing this issue, and I think that's okay. I mean, you can definitely, it doesn't matter how old you are. You can locate an issue and try to get people to rally around it, no matter how old you are.
I really feel, I can understand what you said about the calm side, because often for youth, we don't like to talk about our problems, and we don't really talk about ourselves. I think that's the biggest thing, is that we need to get more comfortable talking about ourselves and how these issues actually affect us personally. So I definitely understand that.
Yeah,
Did
absolutely.
you ever feel nervous when you were out there advocating?
I think that for the most part, I've haven't faced, sort of strong backlash in a way that would have made me particularly nervous per se. But like I said, it's a tradition, and old habits die hard sometimes. So sometimes, yeah, there's a little bit of nervousness that people may not be receptive. But given the I have been mostly successful, it hasn't ever been too bad. But of course, meeting with someone powerful like the mayor of a rather large city like Tampa is was a little bit nerve-wracking, because we were asking her to sort of change something that's like really an important part of the city's identity. And again, they were receptive, so it all worked out great. But yeah, I mean, it's natural to be a little bit nervous in something like that. But I think if you know that you're right, and you have the evidence to back it up, like I did, I think you can be confident going into something like that.
Well, that's fantastic. You're a success story, really. I am going to ask a question for Ella. She's actually responded to us in a back channel chat. And the question from Abe Burgess from Berkeley Institute was, let's see, was the initial reaction from your community when you decided to start advocating for your environment? Sorry, what was the initial reaction from your community? So Ella has said, I promoted myself through talking to people and creating a collective voice within my community. I was just one person, but I got 200 people to create a signed petition. And I also created a short film that was globally recognized, which pushed the government to integrate our fundings. So it sounds like a positive reaction from her community. Okay, if you guys have any other questions for Ella, I know we're a bit short on time. I think we have a minute left for Q&A. So keep the questions coming for Ella, and what we'll do is we'll save those questions, send them to her, and then maybe be able to broadcast them to everyone later. All right, Demetri, one last question. What challenges did you face when you started?
That's a great question. I think that the main thing was just getting in front of people and getting the word out in a way that people will sort of accept, right? Because it is this tradition, as I keep saying, and it's been tricky, or it was, sort of early on to communicate broadly. I mean, obviously, if you're starting from scratch, and I started this Instagram page to kind of talk about it, but originally, you don't have any followers when you start, so you just have to start and keep being persistent to get the word out there. But that's the sort of main challenge is just getting the message out and continuing to do so. And it's taken years. I've been working on this for a few years before we got to launch the Bead Free Bay campaign. And it's been a few years since then, and the problem is still not solved, but we're making progress. And at the end of the day, you just have to keep working at it. And like I said, when you know that you've located this issue and you know that it's something that's really important, you just have to keep working at it. And eventually, you'll make progress, and eventually, we'll be celebrating Gasparilla in a way that isn't harming the environment, and we can continue to do for decades to come.
All right, thank you, Demetri, and thank you, Ella, for your time and all the encouragement you have imparted on us today. We look forward to hearing more about all the beneficial things you will accomplish in the future. Okay, so now I'm going to pass the mic to my co-host, the wonderful William Campbell.
Thank you very much, Noel. It's now my pleasure as well to introduce our first subject matter expert for the conference, Dr. J. Marshall Shepard, who is a leading international expert in weather and climate and is the director of the University of Georgia's Atmospheric Sciences program and is a full professor of geography. He routinely appears on national media outlets and provides expertise to organizations like NASA, NOAA, the White House, Congress, and other stakeholders too. He is also a past president of the American Meteorological Society and is a host of the Weather Channel's award-winning talk show, Weather Geeks. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Shepard. Good afternoon, Dr. Shepard.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, sir, we can hear you. So just to say, we will have a Mentimeter poll going up just behind you. I'd love if you would possibly opine on the results which are coming in for the Menti poll. We have 3 multiple choice questions. Number 1, that the effects of climate change are present in today's weather systems. Number 2, how confident are you in your ability to explain the difference between climate and weather? And number 3, how is climate change predicted to affect hurricanes in Bermuda? So please provide your answers to those questions in the Menti poll. And Dr. Shepard, I'd love if you would possibly have a look at what the students are responding with and whether you would express your opinions on how they feel about it.
Yeah, it looks like the students are pretty spot on and understanding. By the way, I apologize for my voice. I taught class at the university yesterday and now have a little raspiness in my voice. But this first question that I'm seeing on the screen, the effects of climate change are present in today's weather. I think several years ago, I think there would have been more debate about that. But it's pretty clear from the scientific literature and from recent reporting that we can now confidently attribute aspects of today's extreme weather to climate change. I can't see the results of the others coming in. There we go. How confident are you in the ability to explain the difference? Now, this is really an interesting one. Somewhat confident, and very confident. So the majority of responders are not sort of as confident, perhaps, as they might think they probably should be. One of the things that I often say is weather is your mood and climate is your personality. And what I mean by that is today's weather or even this week's weather doesn't necessarily tell you anything about climate change in the same way that your mood today doesn't tell you anything about your personality. You might just be in a bad mood or a great mood that day. And so when someone texts me or tweets me, I'm at Dr. Shepard 2013, by the way, if any of you are on Twitter or X. When someone tweets me and says, hey, Dr. Shepard, it's snowing today or it's cold today, what do you mean there's climate change? Well, that tells me that that person doesn't understand the difference between weather and climate. So always remember that they are separate. And then this question about Bermuda, and I'll speak a little bit about this in my remarks when I give my talk. How is climate change predicted to affect the hurricanes in Bermuda? I think that that's the perception, is that there will be more hurricanes and greater intensity. That's actually not what the literature suggests. It's really those that capture the second bar. There will actually be fewer hurricanes likely, but when they do happen, on average, they will be stronger. So those of you that answered in that regard, that's what the best scientific literature says right now. And I wanted to put that question in there because it's always a tendency for people to say, oh, we're going to have more hurricanes and they're going to be stronger. But the literature suggests that we might not necessarily have more hurricanes and from a frequency standpoint, but when we do, they'll be stronger.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Shepard, for the introduction, and we're looking forward as well to learning a lot more from you in your presentation to follow. And thank you for sharing your thoughts with us today.
Thank you. Sorry, are you ready for me to give my remarks?
Yes, please.
Okay, great. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So I wanted to talk to you about overcoming the wicked challenge of climate change. And I'll define what I mean by wicked challenge in a moment. But there you see all of my credentials and places that you can find me if you need to find me. But I want to sort of talk about wicked challenges. Wicked challenges are these large societal problems that sit at the intersection of policy, society, and perhaps science. I show you this intersection because I actually have a 16-year-old son who just started driving, and it would be quite the wicked challenge for him to navigate that intersection. And for any of us, it would be, but certainly for a newer driver. Well, one of the things that we know is that climate change is a wicked challenge. And recently, about 2 or 3 years ago, I testified before the US Congress, and you can see me there. And what I told them is that the extremes are becoming more extremes in terms of weather events. And that's what we as people will notice. When we think about climate change, oftentimes the discussion is in terms of, oh, we're going to see an increase in temperature of 2 degrees Celsius or 4 degrees Celsius. And for many people, that doesn't resonate. Well, just imagine this. Pop quiz. What is the average body temperature that we all sort of live comfortably at? It's typically around 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. For those of us in the US, we still use Fahrenheit. Imagine if you were running a fever of 2 to 3 degrees in your body for several days to weeks. Your body would start to respond. Your body would know that there was something wrong and it would start to behave and react differently. Well, our planet's the same way. When we're running a temperature of 1, 2 to 3 degrees, it's systems, it's weather, it's oceans, it's biosphere, it's agricultural productivity start to respond, and it's the extremes that people will tend to notice. So I posed this question, and you just sort of addressed some of it too. Is the DNA of climate change already in the weather that we experience today? And the answer to that is it absolutely is. One of the things that you often hear in conversations about climate change is people will say, well, this is what's going to happen in the year 2050 or 2080, or this is about some polar bear. I try to push back on that narrative. It's not just about the polar bear in the polar region or in the North Pole or in the Arctic region. It's not about the year 2050 or 2080. It is about hurricanes today. It's about marine heat waves today, coral bleaching, sea level rise, national security, and a host of challenges that we define as a part of this wicked problem. So let's look at some data. I'm a scientist. And so scientists like me don't like to talk in opinion and innuendo and hand waving. We like to use the data. And so here is a look at the most recent land ocean temperature percentiles for the planet from the period January to September 2023. And what you clearly see, overwhelmingly see, is that the planet is warmer than normal. It's hotter than normal. And if you look at those deep red regions, those are record warm conditions compared to 20th century record. So we are living and seeing this headline almost every year. I am certain, I'll put my academic and scholarly reputation on this statement. 2023 is likely going to be the warmest year on record. It's going to break the year 2016's record. Now, it's not just the air temperature. I pulled this up this morning. This is the ocean temperatures or the anomalies. An anomaly is a difference from normal or a difference from average. And so what we see here is a look at the anomalies in ocean temperatures or sea surface temperatures. A couple of things really jump out at me. Look at the North Atlantic and Mid-Atlantic, where you are located, if you're in Bermuda. This body of water has been abnormally hot all year long. And that's what has been of concern for us for a couple of reasons that I'll talk about. The other thing that really catches my eye in looking at this is look at this pattern here in the Pacific Ocean. That's the El Nino. El Nino is when we have abnormally warm waters in the eastern central Pacific Ocean. And typically during an El Nino year, we tend to see hotter conditions in addition to climate change, and we see changes to weather patterns around the world. Look at how hot or warm the Mediterranean Sea is, and look at the upper North Atlantic, very hot conditions, and even over in the Pacific. We take these measurements from satellites and other measurements that we have in the ocean. One particular concern when we see waters that hot is that it leads to coral bleaching. And that's something that I know many that are concerned about our ecosystem pay close attention to. So this is a look at the areas of highest alert for coral bleaching in response to some of that really hot water that we're seeing in the oceans. And I spoke to someone recently on my podcast, Weather Geeks, and we talked about this, that we may actually see a global bleaching event here in the next few weeks to months, as essentially every ocean around the planet is experiencing extensive coral bleaching. Now, coming a little bit closer to home, this is some data I pulled from a recent report on climate change and Bermuda. And one of the things in that report noted that we're seeing an uptick in what are called marine heat waves. These are essentially heat waves that are happening in the water where the water temperatures are above the 90th percentile. So it's the top 10 percentile of hot conditions in the water. We call those marine heat waves. And so if you look at this graphic, you can clearly see that in recent time, we've seen an uptick in marine heat waves in your region. So this brings me to this report, and it was issued in 2022 by the Bermuda Institute of Ocean Sciences and compiled by the author here. And this shows us, and I want to move this again so that we can. One of the things that you can see are the things that are most impactful for Bermuda. One of the things that we often have made the mistake in doing as scientists is we talk about climate change in a very broad and generic sense. One of the things that I liked about this particular report is it identified various hazards that were most relevant to Bermuda. So for example, air temperature and humidity, changes in intensity and characteristics, that falls in the moderate level, but the confidence in historical trends is very high. Well, ocean warming, marine heat waves, look at this, high. Again, you're an island surrounded by water, and it is apparent from the studies that the water temperatures and marine heat waves will continue to be a significant challenge. Hurricane activity, if you look at hit down here on the left, hurricanes. Now, hurricanes, relatively speaking, are rare in terms of the impacts to Bermuda, but you certainly deal with your share of hurricanes. And what we know about hurricanes, based on that poll, the best scientific literature suggests that intensity is the likely most significant impact of climate change on hurricanes. Stronger hurricanes, hurricanes that rapidly intensify over short periods of time. And I'll talk about that in a moment. So you can see some of the things that are rainfall, moderate impacts in Bermuda and so forth. So I invite you to take a look at this report climate change in Bermuda. You can find it by doing a quick Google search. Has some really interesting information relevant to your home. So in that report, it also talks about vulnerability and risk. And this is something that even in some of my own research that I've talked about as well. The hazards or the climate or weather events themselves, and then we talk about who is exposed in terms of populations, buildings, roadways, estuaries, or so forth. And then when you combine the exposure to that hazard, that leads to a certain measure of vulnerability. And so I think one of the things that we're increasingly thinking about from a policy standpoint or a decision-making standpoint is what aspects of Bermuda, for example, are most vulnerable to some of the things that I just talked about? And then what do we do about it from a mitigation or an adaptation standpoint? That's where I think much of the discussion needs to be. And I think as the youth of Bermuda and the world, many of those challenges will be where you will be sort of thinking you're putting your best energy. Here's data showing the temperature increase in Bermuda. Clearly, like most of the world, the trend is upward in temperature, air temperature in Bermuda, so that shouldn't be a surprise to anyone. Here are the hurricane tracks. We know that the Atlantic Ocean is very active from about August to October. Hurricane season actually starts June 1st, but really starts to ramp up. But we're seeing a couple of interesting things that are very relevant to Bermuda. One of the studies that I often cite is a study that suggests that in previous decades, hurricanes used to attain their strongest intensity down in here, these latitudes. But there's new work suggesting that hurricanes are attaining their strongest intensity further poleward or at higher latitudes. And that certainly would start to bring Bermuda into play for some of these stronger hurricanes as we move forward in time. So that's certainly something to keep an eye on. Here's an example of 2 storms just in recent years, and those storms underwent rapid intensification. Rapid intensification is defined as when we see an increase of 30 knots or 35 miles per hour in wind speed in 24 hours or less. In other words, that hurricane strengthens rapidly over the span of one day. And so I think this is, when we think about Bermuda, I think that this idea of stronger storms at higher latitude and rapid intensification is important. So in other words, you could go to sleep to what you thought was a Category 1 storm approaching you and wake up to a Category 3 or Category 4 storm. That's why we are concerned about rapid intensification. But you know, I think you all are smart enough and savvy enough to know this. I don't like to just focus on the negative or the bad, because that can all weigh us down, or we can all become very depressed or think it's a hopeless thing, but there is hope. And one of the things that I found in my just sort of researching what Bermuda is doing, Bermuda is actually leading on some of the actions that need to be taken. There's an integrated resource plan which tries to set reduction of fossil fuels at 85%. And corresponding contributions of 85% of renewable energy sources by the year 2035. That's leadership. That's what the rest of the world needs to be doing as well. And we certainly have the Paris Agreement and other vehicles or mechanisms that are trying to move us in those directions. But Bermuda is already taking those steps. I found an ocean prosperity program that is protecting fisheries. I found initiatives within the country that are passing very important and progressive adaptation codes for building and energy. These are the types of actions that give me hope. And what else gives me hope is all of you. I mean, the fact that you have taken the time to engage in this particular conference tells me that you're going to move the needle forward on this. In fact, you know, I pulled this from one of the graphics because I think your engagement is key. I mean, we know, and I've often said many times before, even outside of this conference, the youth of the world will lead us in this, but you shouldn't have to lead us alone. We as adults and our generation got you in this mess. but you have the energy. You are not weighed down by the biases of the past. You will help us get out of it. So here are the things that I think you can do. And yes, when I get the question, well, Dr. Shepherd, what can I do? Here are my big 5 things that you can do. You can engage with the process to shape decision makers. Many of you, if you're not voters, you will be voters soon. Participate in that process and become a climate voter. So when you are able to vote, become a climate voter, vote with the climate in mind. And if you're not able to vote, engage in the process. There's still ways that you can, participate and encourage others to register to vote and so forth. You can help shatter misinformation that's out there. Your generation is the generation of social media. I mentioned earlier that I'm on Twitter or X. I'm also on TikTok at Dr. Shepherd Knows. And I very much try to be in these spaces because if we as experts or people that understand what's happening are not in these spaces, people with agendas and with misinformation are gladly going to fill the gap that we leave behind. Compost your food and start a garden. These are some things that I started doing during COVID and when everyone had to stay at home. Composting keeps food out of landfills. Landfill food can become methane. Methane is a significant greenhouse gas. But if we can compost our food and put it back into nature, into our gardens, into our lawns and our flower beds, that's a sort of sustainable way to keep bad carbon out of our atmosphere. Tell the climate stories that matter. And I see that I left an A off there. Tell the climate stories that matter. It's important to have the data and the things that I've shown you. But when you're talking to your family or when you're talking to people, tell the stories that matter. And again, speak out. Now, speaking out for you may be different than me. Speaking out for you may be starting a blog or a TikTok series or a YouTube channel or writing essays. We all have a voice. It doesn't have to be the same. I'm losing my voice right now, but we all have a voice. It doesn't have to be the same voice. And so this is something that I'll end on. I was a part of a Netflix activity several years ago, and they asked certain scientists that were a part of this effort to just provide things that you can do. So these are some things you can do in your household, in your workplace, and in your community. And so here you see the suggestion that I put forward. Dr. John Foley and Dr. Leah Stokes are colleagues of mine that have also offered suggestions. There are a host of other things that you can do, but these are just a sample of some of the things that you can do to engage now and with effective outcomes in your communities. So with that, I will stop. And for me, it's always more interesting and fun to take the questions.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Shepherd, for sharing your voice with us. I appreciate you as well doing it with a little bit of a scratch there. But at the same time, I think everything that you've shared with us this morning and this afternoon is extremely important for all of us to hear and to engage with going forward. So just bringing up some of the questions that we've had in from the chat. Certainly, we've had a question in from M. Lightborn from the Bermuda Institute as well, asking whether hurricanes are reaching closer to the poles on that map there because of the waters around the poles warming, and whether we're seeing an expansion perhaps in the range.
I think we're
hurricanes.
seeing, that's a great question. And I think that you're spot on with the answer. I think as we're seeing ocean temperatures warm and extend further poleward, these hurricanes, their fuel supply is warm ocean water. And traditionally, as the hurricanes would move further poleward, the water was too cold to sustain them. But in years like 2023, where we see anomalously hot water extending up around Greenland, these storms, we've had a couple of storms this year and in the last year as well that have reached well up into parts of Canada and near Greenland. So I think that's something that we all better get used to.
Mm-hmm. And on that note too, we've had another question asking how powerful do you think the hurricanes will be over the years? Is there perhaps a leading view that we may see a degree of reclassification around intensity?
I don't think so. There was some discussion about Category 6 hurricanes and these types of things. I'm more worried about the rapid intensification. So the fact that they can just go from Cat 1 to Cat 5 in less than a day or in 12 hours, as we saw with Hurricane Otis recently in Acapulco, Mexico. It's just this explosive, or even what I've called hyper intensification. That's worrisome because, again, if you're in Bermuda, or if you're in Florida, or wherever you are, and you didn't or weren't able to evacuate, as many of you are, you're an island nation. You might go to sleep thinking you are dealing with one category of storm and wake up to a dramatically different storm. So that's what worries me more than reclassification on the back end. Now, having said that, we'll sort of continue to monitor that, because intensity is where we see the greatest response to climate change.
Oh, certainly. Following on from there, where would you say on the rise in water temperature point, what would be the most vulnerable marine ecosystems, in your opinion?
Well, I think, as I alluded to, I think coral are significantly vulnerable to these marine heat waves. Our fisheries in general, there are many examples where we're seeing sort of fisheries shift in terms of their availability because of the water temperature changes. There's a show that I watch on Discovery Channel called The Deadliest Catch, and it's about the sort of crabbing industry up in Alaska. And, we've seen many cases where the crab have just disappeared. They have had to shut down the fisheries in that region because the crab are just gone. And some of the best discussions in science suggest that it may be a response to warming temperatures. We're seeing similar examples even in the fisheries regions here in the Atlantic as well. Off the coast of Georgia, the state I live in, there's been a real issue with black gill and shrimp, and they may be related to, for example, warming ocean temperatures.
And Dr. Shepard, then, in terms of making these stories about things that matter and telling the stories that matter, what suggestion even would you give to some of the audience listening in on how to relate that immediately to our lifestyles here in Bermuda, for example?
Well, one of the things that I would do is I'd recommend you visit a website called the Georgia Climate Stories. That's a website where we have produced video stories of people in the state of Georgia and how aspects of their lives are uniquely impacted by climate. I think that there are similar stories that can be told perhaps in Bermuda or in other parts of the world. Georgia Climate Stories.
Georgia Climate Stories. We'll ask for the link to be posted in the chat for that. And additionally, as well, we will also provide the links to the 2022 climate study on Bermuda that you mentioned by Dr. Mark Gouchard as well. So as well, following on for questions, Dr. Shepard, we've got a question in asking, what do you think is the first mass of carbon emission that can and should be dealt with? Or perhaps what is the largest share of carbon emission that we should maybe approach in providing?
Well, it's an interesting question. I think, clearly the emissions can be sort of boxed into different categories: transportation sector, buildings, land use, if you will, forestry, and so forth, and then industrial uses. I think the biggest bang for the buck is likely, in my view, and again, there may be others that challenge this, are going to come from the dramatic sort of shift in our energy economy broadly. And I think that's where the biggest bang for the buck will be, in terms of massive shift to wind and solar and tidal power, wave generated energy, and so forth. I think that's where we'll see the most significant savings, even perhaps, and it's controversial, but moving into more nuclear energy as a part of our portfolio, even though you're dealing with waste issues for sure.
And what type of changes then would you feel would be most appropriate for talking about economic activity in the future then? Seeing as we have an audience of young students who are thinking about how we can engage our lives and our jobs and our work with climate action, where would you suggest they go?
No, it's a great point. I mean, I think it's just important to note that every time you go to a market or a grocery store, or when you're considering your own personal health care, these are things now that are connected to climate change. For example, and I saw in the chat someone mentioning about composting being tough because so much of the food is imported into Bermuda, and so the sustainability would be a challenge. But whenever we see stressors due to climate change that affect agricultural productivity or livestock production, that ends up costing more for consumers on the back end. It's just basic economics, law of supply and demand. So when there's a drought in California where they produce much of the strawberry, broccoli, and grape production, and at least for this country, low supply means higher prices. And so it's important for the youth to understand these connections now, because ultimately, as you move on in your careers, you'll understand that this is not just about polar bears or coral reefs, which are very important. It's also about economic vitality. It's about public health. It's about the sort of hardiness of our infrastructure, our roadways and our bridges and so forth. Things that we live are what I call kitchen table issues.
Absolutely, yeah. And they are certainly kitchen table issues for all of us here. And so thank you as well for helping illustrate just the nexus of connection between these and our immediate lives. And on an immediate point as well for Bermuda's local ecosystem, how would you think that coral bleaching in Bermuda might impact our local fisheries, our local waters, the areas in which we live and play and work?
Yeah, it'll have a compound effect for sure, because coral reefs and coral is such an important part of not just sort of your marine ecosystem and the vitality of it and the health of it, but also I would imagine that there's quite a bit of tourism around coral reefs and scuba diving and various things that could be impacted as well. And I could imagine that tourism is a significant part of the Bermuda economy.
It certainly is. And for that as well, we'd like to invite you to visit, of course, Dr. Shepard, but also thank you
I
very
may
much.
take you up soon.
I certainly hope so. And as well would like to extend our thanks as well for sharing your thoughts this afternoon with us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. So once again, folks, we're turning back over to another Menti poll, and on the back of Dr. Shepard's brilliant and engaging and informative presentation, we would just like to ask all of you if there's anything that you learned that was new or perhaps surprised you from Dr. Shepard's presentation. And we'd like to just provide responses to those in the chat too. So we've got a whole bunch of good responses coming in. Yep, the 2023 is going to be the warmest on record. Yep, coral bleaching, certainly of great concern to us here. The world is indeed a lot warmer now, and this is something that we need to consider and be wary of going forward. Yep, the changes in weather not always directly, immediately visible in their ties to climate change. Bermuda is indeed taking a leadership role. That's right. Yeah, but I think that there's much more that we all can do to encourage that leadership role and to take leadership ourselves in encouraging action on it. Has Dr. Shepard encouraged you all to have these conversations with an eye towards how they affect us deeply and in our day-to-day lives? Yep, there will be more coral bleaching as well. All of these are impacts that really directly affect us, but also, as Dr. Shepard mentioned, have compound impacts on our lifestyles too. For example, as he brought up, if there is a drought in one of the places where we in Bermuda are importing vegetables and fruit and agricultural products from, then we might find that the price in grocery stores of those goods goes up, and that these are things that affect what we call cost of living. And these are, of course, very serious, as he called them, kitchen table issues for all of us here. Yeah, there's certainly a lot depending on the strength and health of the climate. Certainly our strength and health depends much on it too. Learned that Earth will soon reach a boiling point. Wow. At what point do we feel that point will be reached, and what crucially can we do to prevent it and to adapt to a warmer world? Yep, that we can work towards it with household, workplace, and community discussions. Composting, yes, a very critical and important emerging place of importance on how we address climate issues there. And certainly with an eye towards encouraging more of our own food production here in Bermuda. Yep, that hurricanes are starting to develop really rapidly over a span of 24 hours. Dr. Shepard mentioned Hurricane Otis, which hit Mexico from the Pacific Ocean just a couple weeks ago, and that intensified from a tropical storm into a Category 5 overnight. Certainly something for us here in Bermuda to be on the lookout for and aware of. Yep, that we can do much more for our community than we think. Absolutely that. We have a lot of issues that need to be addressed. Certainly. Thank you as well for all of you for coming together and being part of the discussion on what we can do to address these issues and work together on solving them. All right, thank you all very much for all of your brilliant responses to the Menti polls as well, and for your engagement with presentations this afternoon from Ella and from Demetri and from Dr. Shepard too. I'm now going to turn it back over to our other host, Noel, who's going to provide some lovely engagement with some of our alumni presenters from youth climate summits in past years. Thank you.
Thank you, William. Up next is our first word cloud question. All right. Apologies, Dr. Shepard is not the only one with a cold. All right, so go back to your Menti browser window and type 1 or 2 words that define what climate justice means to you. If you need the link, it's in the chat. If you can't access the Menti, please put your responses in the chat and we'll add them for you. So for those of you that don't know how word clouds work, they're actually pretty cool. So words get bigger when more people submit the same answer. So it allows us to see if several of you have the same thoughts and feelings about the topics we're asking you about. All right, we have fight. Right now is the biggest word, and I love that. All right, change is about equal to fight. It's fantastic. I love to see that passion. All right, high taxes for pollution. That's a good one. We've got 33 responses so far, and I think there's about 90 of you in this room. So keep those responses coming, please. Justice, that's getting bigger as well. And accountability. Accountability is a big one. Especially for a small island nation, we don't have a lot of trickle-down effect from the upper echelon to the poorest regions of our community. Okay, my one in here would be equity. All right, change. Change is a great one. All right, so finish up your responses. And I'm going to show you BUEI's working definition of climate justice. So BUEI defines climate justice as giving voice to those most vulnerable to the negative impacts of climate change. As a small island nation, we are pretty vulnerable to the negative impacts of climate change. As an example, climate justice in Bermuda, as an example of climate justice in Bermuda, it would be good to ensure that Bermudians have climate legislation that reflects the needs of our most vulnerable communities. Youth being one of them, just to mention that. All right, finish up your answers and let's move on to our next set of guests. Next up, we have Olly Cherry and Tejah Bean, 2 local Youth Climate Summit alumni. Hey, Olly, are you there? Can you please introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. It's great to be here. My name's Olly Cherry. I'm a 16-year-old student from Bermuda. Currently, I'm attending Suffield Academy, a boarding school in Connecticut. But before this year, I attended Summersfield.
Nice to meet you, Olly. Tejah, your turn. Can you please introduce yourself?
Hello, my name is Tejah Bean. I go to the Barclay Institute. I am 16 years old. I've been with YCS since the very beginning in 2021.
Well, it's great to have you back, Tejah. Can you tell us a bit about how you got involved in climate action?
Well, I first got involved in climate action. I was a freshman in high school. It was the big wide world to me. And my teacher, my biology teacher, had introduced me to this opportunity where we got to go to BUEI and learn more about climate change. And I just thought it would be such a great thing to do.
Olly, what about you? How did you get involved in climate action?
Well, I think growing up on such a beautiful island, I've had the opportunity to spend so much time around the environment. I understood that everything in the environment was connected and fragile. And for climate change, the science was clear. It says that climate change is happening and it's happening as a result of human activity. I was frustrated that not more was being done and that others seemed not to care.
I think we can all share that sentiment. Thank you for voicing it. Olly, what's one activity or initiative that you are most proud of?
Well, I'm really proud that we were able to meet with leaders in the government and energy industry. We sent a message that the youth cares and we're tired of negligence when our futures are at risk. So like Dr. Shepard said, another month, another unprecedented climate record. And 2023 is almost certainly going to be the hottest year on record. And the consequences are all too clear. I'm happy that I heard from the government and Belco on the actions that are being implemented, but more work still needs to be done.
I think we can all agree to that. Tejah, what about you? What's one activity or initiative that you're most proud of?
I am really proud of us getting to visit Nonsuch Island and see the cacao birds. I felt like it was very unique to Bermuda and it felt like really personalized. And we also got to pick up trash. I felt like that was us doing our part and we got to really be involved.
That's fantastic. Nonsuch is great. I've been there. I'm not sure if everyone else has, but if you get the opportunity, please go. It's part of our heritage. All right, Tejah, do you consider your work to be advocacy or activism, and why?
I would say it's definitely a bit of both because you do have to go and you have to advocate for yourself and you have to be loud and tell people this is what I believe in and I want to stand for it. But you also have to set the example and practice what you preach and then show people this is the way to do it and we can all do this together.
Definitely. And I think in many cases, most people don't know that there are actually two types of activism. There's loud activism where you're out there in the public, championing for your cause. And then there's quiet activism where you can talk to individuals in your community, you can talk to adults, you can send letters or, be involved in programs in that way to inspire change. Olly, what about you? Do you consider your work to be advocacy or activism?
Well, I think like she said, it's a little bit of both, but I would say that activism is the best fit. For a problem that's been called by the UN the greatest threat that the world has ever faced, I think we need an approach that is action-oriented and one that gets things done.
I wholeheartedly agree with that. Olly, was there a person, experience, or organization that inspired you most during your time with the Youth Climate Summit?
I was inspired by a lot of people. So first of all of the NGOs do amazingly hard work. Rosemary, who organizes the summit, does a great job in getting the youth involved in a problem that affects us youth more than the people that are making the climate laws right now. And then last but not least, my Summerfield science teachers, Miss Sweeney, Miss Young, and Miss Swan. It wouldn't have been possible without you guys.
Tejah, what about you? Was there a person, experience, or organization that inspired you most during your time with YCS?
The person that inspired me the most during my time at YCS, I would say would be Zane Sinclair, because he's also a Barclayite like myself. And then he went on to graduate and do amazing things through climate action. And it inspired me and made me believe that I can accomplish those things too.
Zane is fantastic. I love his entrepreneurship story. That's another conversation for a different day, but yes, we love Zane. All right, we've got some images from your field trips. Let's see, was there a field trip that you enjoyed most, Tejah?
The field trip I would say I enjoyed the most would be 100% our trip to Hamilton Princess, where we got to partake in a sustainable cooking class. And it really taught me a lot about cooking within the season and getting to grow your own food because they had their own honey and their own vegetables. And it was just a wonderful experience.
Was there a meal that you created that's super memorable? Can you tell us a bit about it?
I would say it would definitely be the lionfish because I was convinced that could kill you, but they have the license and they caught them and they cleaned them and it was delicious.
All right, well, you'll have to share that recipe with us after this.
100%.
Ollie, what about you? Was there a field trip that you enjoyed the most?
For me, I would say the water start trip was the most fun. We rowed the boat out to Birds Island. We got to snorkel around the island. We saw them grow their own food. They explained the plants and the ecosystems that are endemic to Bermuda.
Yes, shout out to JP and the Water Start team. We appreciate you. Ollie, do you have any environmental tips for your peers or the community?
I think it can be sometimes seem hard to grapple with a problem so big and wonder if your actions are really making a difference. But I think it's important to note that individual action is important, and changing what you can do can influence others. And without individual activists getting together, there would be no sunrise movement camping out in the halls of Congress. So while it's true that we have already dangerously warmed the planet by burning fossil fuels for generations, it's important to remember that the future isn't set in stone, and it's up to us to decide which one plays out. So be vocal, start clubs, talk to people, participate, and care. And just because we're starting to see the impacts of climate change doesn't mean that we should just give up and let it get worse. And we can really make a difference, but only if we all do something about it.
Powerful words. Thank you so much. Tejah, do you have any environmental tips for us?
Yes, I agree with Ollie that we should just try to get involved wherever we can. And no matter how small you think your contribution is, just try to do what you can and come outside with us, enjoy the fresh air, pick up some garbage, and just get involved, because a small voice matters. And we can start a ripple effect. And I believe in everyone here that you guys have the potential to succeed and to contribute to a greater Bermuda.
All right, those are words of passion and wisdom. Tejah, do you have any closing remarks for us? Anything that you really want to get out there and make sure that everyone in this community hears?
I would say just again get involved. And we live in a beautiful island, Bermuda, and it can be easy to not realize the problems because all you see is the beautiful crystal clear water and the nice sunshine. But just go and look for a problem, because I promise you'll find one and you can contribute and help remedy it.
Okay, Ollie, what about you? Do you have any closing tips or remarks or anything that you really want to get out there to make sure that all the youth or the adults in our community are hearing and understanding?
Yeah. So we've heard that this is a huge problem, and we've heard the effects of what climate change are going to be. So if you care, then do something and get involved and sign up and use your voice. Don't forget how important that is.
Thank you guys so much. Lots of words of wisdom today, and thank you for your time, because I know, Tejah, for you, school's out right now, so you actually came here on your day off. I'm so sorry about that. And Ollie, you're actually away in school right now. What school are you attending?
I'm at Suffield Academy in Connecticut.
Awesome. And how are you enjoying your time out there?
I'm loving it so far.
Great. So Tejah, a quick question. What do you plan to do in future? Do you plan to go into further studies in college? Are you looking into entrepreneurship? What are your plans?
Actually, I wanted to follow in the footsteps of Zane Sinclair and start my own business as well. Maybe like a sustainable substitutes for Bermuda, like maybe better laundry detergent, and just put it into places like marketplaces. We could have better options than what we have right now.
That makes sense. It really does. So I'm going to turn this over to the students, because I'm noticing that you guys are super quiet. We don't have any questions from you. We've got about 2 minutes left. Do you guys have any questions for your local alumni? Crickets. I'm hearing crickets right now. All right. So I guess, oh, there we go. We have a question for Ollie. What projects have you worked on?
Like I said, we talked to government leaders and gave them our youth perspective on policies and initiatives that are being implemented in the country. So things like having more renewable energy sources in Bermuda, having more sustainable methods of food, importation, travel, that kind of thing.
Okay. All right, so thank you guys very much for your time again. And we are going to move on to our next Menti poll. So before we end today's session, I want to thank all of our speakers for their time and their efforts to make our world a better place. These guys have busy schedules, so again, thank you. We have one more question for you before today's session ends. And that is, what are you taking away from your experience today? This is an opportunity for you to take a moment, take a deep breath in and out, and reflect. This is an open-ended question, so don't worry about your spelling. Just let the thoughts flow. Let the thoughts flow. Apologies. And again, the question is, what are you taking away from your experience today, your first day? Right, that there are other people like me. Yes, that was actually something inspirational that I realized several years ago, is that there are actually other people, not just on the island, but globally. There are other youth that have the same concerns as I do and that want to make an impactful difference, long-term, renewable. All right. There are more people than I originally thought. All right, it seems like a lot of you actually are making the same realization, that there are just so many of us globally that want to make a difference and that want to incite and inspire change. Let's see, that this can really lead to bigger change, that my actions aren't as small as I thought. That's a good one. Saying your part can make a positive impact for everyone. Yes, it can. It really can. Although you're just one person, you can make a difference. That there are a lot of climate issues worldwide. And as we go throughout the rest of the sessions, you'll see and you'll hear, the experiences of youth from other countries and kind of see the impacts that they're having to deal with and how they're hoping to respond to those. Take action, no matter how small it really does. No matter how small, it really does make a difference. And always try to make a positive impact. Go outside and clean up. I love that one. That's an action. All right, so I'm going to take this opportunity to please thank our sponsors again, HSBC and AXA for making this all possible. We are looking ahead to Tuesday's program, so we've got a long weekend coming up, and we'll see you again on Tuesday for day 2 of the BUEI Youth Climate Summit. And thank you guys for your time. A reminder that Ella will actually be on site here in person on day 4, I believe it is. All right. Thank you guys so much and have a great day.
Thank you all for joining us, and see you on Tuesday.